Okairi! Welcome back to my channel, Made Between the Pages. My name is Taylor, and today we're going to be starting kind of a new series on my channel where I talk about the books that I loved before I got behind the camera and started BookTube. I've been watching BookTube for about 2 or 3 years, but it was only this year that I picked up my camera and decided to join the community myself. That was in April, one of those two, of this year. So naturally, we talk about the books that we've been reading recently, especially in our wrap-ups, right? We talk about the ones we read that month, and we just kind of naturally tend to talk about the books that are currently in our reading sphere. But I didn't start reading when I joined BookTube. This video isn't going to focus on books from a long time ago. It's not going to talk about childhood favorites or about, classics that I love. That's going to be a separate video. But this is going to talk about the books that I really enjoyed, either my 5-star reads or 4-star that was like so close to 5-star and is stuck in my head type of reads from the last 2 years. So from around 2017, 2018 to 2020. So I guess that's 3 years. I have a lot of these books actually, so I'm going to make this a 4-part series. In this first part, I'm going to talk about some books that I really liked, and in subsequent parts I will also be doing that. And I'll also be talking about books that I didn't like in later versions of this series. A lot of these books I do have physically in America, so because I love them, I purchased them, but I don't have them physically with me. Over time, things kind of go back and forth in suitcases over the years, and it just so happens that I only have a few of these with me on this side of the pond. The first series I'm going to talk about is the Wayward Children series by Shauna Maguire. This book is super popular on BookTube, and I can definitely see why, because I love it. But I haven't talked about it like ever on my channel, and a lot of that is because I read it before I got behind the camera. I read all of these on audiobook from my library, and I discovered them back when I think there were only 3 out. So it was Every Hearted Doorway, Down Among the Sticks and Bones, and Beneath the Sugar Sky were the 3 that were out, and I just binge read all of those, and I was obsessed. So of course I bought the physical copy immediately after. Those are expensive little tiny novella books, but worth it. Ever since then, I have kept up with the releases, and I make sure to consume the content as soon as it's released. So after that, there was In an Absent Dream, Come Tumbling Down, and then I think soon she's going to be releasing Across the Far Green Fields, maybe? So when it comes to ranking the books, all of them except for Come Tumbling Down were 5 stars. I loved all of them. Come Tumbling Down seemed like it was missing some of that, I don't know, eloquence, some of that magic that Maguire usually puts into her books. And it just kind of felt like we were revisiting the moors for no reason. I don't know, I kind of wish she had written about a different world and not gone back to one we'd already been to. But it was still 4 stars, and I enjoyed reading it. My favorite book by far in the series is Down Among the Sticks and Bones. Closely followed, I think, by In an Absent Dream. Those 2 books, I was inserted into the world. The writing is phenomenal. I've never seen anything like it before, and if you haven't read the series, I highly, highly recommend that you do. If you haven't heard what the series is about, it's a portal fantasy series about children who find a door to another world, and this world is perfect for them. This is where they're meant to be. But through some kind of circumstances, they end up having to leave that world and come back to our world. And when they come back here, they don't want to be here, but they can't find their way back. And they end up going to a school, like a boarding school, that's run by an elderly woman who went through this process. And she creates a safe space for these kids to kind of try to adjust and move through life again. The second book I'm going to talk about is actually the same author, but under a different pen name. So Shauna Maguire also writes under the pen name Mira Grant, not sure how to say that. We're on brand in this video already for my channel. Under this pen name, she's written a book called Into the Drowning Deep. I don't usually read horror. and I'm terrified of the ocean. So I don't know why I decided to pick this up. I do. It's because it's the author from the Wayward Children series. But this is a book about killer mermaids. Mermaids as they are supposed to be. Vicious predators. And it's a book about a research team who goes out to the sea to where another boat disappeared. I don't remember how many years ago, so many years ago. And they want to find out what happened to this boat and prove whether mermaids exist or not. And this is not a spoiler, but they find them and they exist. And as someone who has a fear of the ocean, there are parts of this book where I thought my heart was gonna like burst out of my chest because of the tension and the overwhelming like pressure that was built. It was so, so good. Like when creatures, when anyone was under the water, I could feel how deep and dark and pressure-filled it was. It was phenomenal. So that atmospheric writing that works really well with the Wayward Children series also really shines with Into the Drowning Deep. This book was also 5 stars. The third series I'm going to talk about here is the Nevernight Chronicles. Now, I've mentioned that this is a favorite of mine on the channel, but I haven't like discussed it. And this is not a full discussion review video, but I don't think it's clear how much I love this series on my channel yet. I read this series at the end of 2019 and I dropped the rest of my TBR as soon as I was like 3 chapters into the first book. And I was like, I have to binge it. There's no way around it. I have to binge it. I don't know where I would be without my Libby app. I'm very, very lucky to have an American library card that I activated when I was back in the States, so I can access my American library from over here. And that's what's allowed me to find a series I love and be able to read the rest of them without waiting for shipping. So thank you so much, Libby. You saved my life. The Nevernight Chronicles, the writing is not for everyone, which I think everyone knows at this point. It's like a very self-aware book. It's very snarky. It calls out its characters. It calls the reader out. And it has this style where there are footnotes at the bottom, and that can really throw some people off because the footnotes are like a second story almost. But I love the characters, I loved the plot twists in this, I loved the concepts that were explored in this, and it was just so enjoyable from the beginning to the end. Mr. Kindly and his sass is just, it's everything. I love the fact that Mia is not a good character, she's not a good person, but she really, really leans into that and owns it, and the world around her rewards her for that activity because the world around her is not a necessarily good world. And I just love how those two things really, really match together. Also, I've mentioned in previous videos, I'm not sure which one, but I'll link it up above, Ashlyn is, I mean, I already knew I was bisexual before I read this book, but if I hadn't known, Ashlyn would have been my awakening. She is just perfection, and I wish that she was real because I would 100% date her. I could not stop reading this series. I read them one after the other. My favorite, I think, is God's Grave, number 2 in the series, but they were all 5 stars for me. It was also perfect timing because at this point Illumicrate re-released the UK editions with sprayed edges, and best believe I got on that immediately. If you don't know what the Nevernight series is about, it's about a girl named Mia Corvair whose family is killed at the beginning of the first book. And she's a young girl, but she decides in that moment she's going to get revenge on the people who killed her family. And to do so, she goes to an assassin school. And not like, you know, ooh, we're learning to kill people, but like a legit assassin school where they murder people. And it's just a joy to read. The next one on this list is not in the fantasy realm. I actually have read a lot of books that aren't fantasy. I've been in a fantasy mood for the last year, and it is my main genre, but I do pick up a lot of books that aren't fantasy, especially on audiobook. This next one is The Killer Across the Table, and I was inspired to pick this up because I love Criminal Minds, the TV show. In Criminal Minds, it's different from other cop shows because it's based on profiling, where you get into the mind of a serial killer in order to catch them. Obviously, Criminal Minds is a dramatized version of that, but The Killer Across the Table is the real-world stories of the people who do this. And it's them telling about the techniques, and you even get to hear about interviews that they've had with serial killers, and it is fascinating. Horrifying, and fascinating. And I gave this 5 stars. I really enjoyed listening to it, and I would recommend it to anyone who hasn't read it before. The next book on this list is The Armored Saint. I've talked about this book a couple times on my channel, and I wish more people knew about it because it is so good. This is a really short book in a trilogy, basically a novella, but it is so well written. It's about a girl named Heloise who lives in a grim, dark fantasy world where brutal, awful things happen to people who are associated with magic. Because in this world, if you use magic, it opens a portal to the other world through which demons can enter. So if there's even a spark, a hint, a tiny little boop of magic around you, they will come and murder you. Just flat out murder you and everyone around you. So it's very dangerous to be associated with that. This is kind of a coming-of-age book set in a very brutal world. So Heloise is figuring out who she is, both internally and within society itself, where her place is, and she has to grow up pretty fast. But the writing is fantastic. The LGBTQA+ representation is wonderful, in my opinion. And I think that it's just worth the read, and it won't take so long because of how short it is. The 6th book on this list is The Handmaid's Tale. So this is, a really popular book. I think people who aren't in the book world also know about this book and have read it. This is a dystopian world where patriarchy is taken to the farthest extreme and women have basically become slaves. Their names are erased and they take the name of their husband that they are assigned to. They can only have sex with the people that are approved in order to get approved birth rates. They have to wear face coverings so that they can't see anyone and no one can see them, and they are clocked wherever they go in this world. It is frightening, terrifying, mostly because it doesn't seem so crazy. Like, I can see this happening if certain people were allowed to stay in power, and that part is what makes this book so good and so hard-hitting. A lot of this book takes place in the minds of these women, so we also see the internalized misogyny and the internalized structures that they have in their brains from being treated this way. And it's terrifying to think that that type of programming is possible, but it certainly is. It has been done before. It's just not on the scale that this book is not prophesizing, but posturing could happen in the future. The next book on this list is Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. Now, I do plan to do some Brando Sando videos in the future because I just don't talk about his books on my channel that much in general because I read them all in 2019. But this is probably one of my favorite Brandon Sanderson books, at least top 3, which is a very unusual opinion. This is his first published novel, I believe, and as such, it has a bit of a different feel from his other books. It's still Brandon Sanderson, but there's some intangible element that's different. So in this world, in the past, there were people who would wake up suddenly and become blessed, basically become a god overnight. And they were given immortality, amazing healing powers, magic, basically everything. And they went to live in this city called Elantris. However, this blessing ends up turning into a curse. I think maybe 10 or 5 years before this book takes place, correct me if I'm wrong, is when it changes into a curse. So instead of waking up as a god, you wake up as basically a zombie and your skin is like decaying and falling off, and you have to go live in Elantris, but basically as a lifetime quarantine, not as, you know, welcome. And if you have this curse, any pain that happens to your body, if you stub your toe, whatever, that pain stays with you forever. It never goes away. So the fate of these people is that slow pains slowly build up, and they eventually go crazy from being in so much pain every day of their life. They're also constantly starving and cannot die. So basically it just really sucks to be an Elantrian. And then one day, the prince of the kingdom wakes up and has this curse. So without further ado, he is thrown into Elantris and they shut the door. And this story is an exploration of human nature, how we function, what we need to do well, and what real leadership looks like. And I just loved every second of this book. It's slower than other Brandon Sanderson books. It's more philosophical. He has a huge religious aspect in this, and I love when religion is tackled critically in books. One of the other main characters is a religious leader. The other main character is a girl, who I'm forgetting her name right now. It'll be on the screen. She wants to get into the political sphere and start understanding how power works in her world. So she's pulling some strings in her political sphere while the prince is doing his thing in Elantris, and the other religious leader who is against the people in Elantris, basically sees them as a blight on the world, is doing his thing. And then their plots all come together in the typical Brandon Sanderson way. The Sanderlanche is still in this book. And it's just phenomenal. I love it. I love Raoden, the main character. He's just a cinnamon bun. And I read an interview with Sando when he said that, you know, he just wanted to write a character who was just a good character. Not complicated in that way, just wanted to do good and to see how the story would unfold around a character like that. And it's wonderful. I love it. 5 out of 5 stars, of course. That concludes the first section of this Books Before BookTube series. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these books. I know some of them are heavy hitters, some of them not so much. Let me know what you think. I'd love to chat with you. But for now, I'm gonna head out. Jane!